right. Well, it is nice to see and hear you all. I hope that everyone is having a good time at their graduations. Carlene, I've loved your posts. You are a woman about town on the Ward 8 graduation circuit. It looks like a lot of fun.
Yes, they've all had their own personality, but all fun in the end and a lot of excitement. So it's good to see students on this end of things as they're finishing.
Awesome. I did manage to borrow some regalia up in Baltimore. So I have that for tomorrow's graduations. Today we were just dresses for the fifth grade graduation. But I just got a message from Ruth that says, I am here and can't get in.
Yeah, she was in the attendees and I was just going to promote her, but now she's gone. So I don't know where she went.
Okay.
So I'll just be on the lookout for when she tries to join again.
Great. Okay, so we all have an agenda, and I know that Alistair was already in it, and Carlene, I got your request to access. I sent that. So anything that you want to add to the agenda that is not on there? Cool. All right. Then hearing none, we shall go forward. I thought today we would tackle lots of the existing business we've had on the docket, starting with the homeschool panel, moving on to literacy, moving on to what we're now calling Connecting Across Difference rather than the ethnic studies event, and Alistair will tell us more about that, and ending with social studies standards updates. And then I had a couple of items that I dropped into new business, but also want to entertain any other new business topics that may arise. So I shall turn it to Dr. Reed to tell us the latest and greatest on the homeschooling panel and see what else she might need from us.
Thank you. So I finally had life and board stuff settle down a little bit to confirm some folks who, or at least two people, who are interested in speaking. But I guess what I need is I'm trying to differentiate between who's coming to the working session and who's coming to the public meeting. And Representative Gazoy also, I think, found one person. So essentially we have people who are kind of funneling in. We need to like send out, I guess, formal invites, but then where are they going? So if you all can help me, I guess as seasoned representatives, and Alex, you can probably, like, who would make sense for the working session, and then who would make sense for the public meeting, and then, or we can follow up and start telling people where to go. And
hey, Dr. Reed, would you be willing to talk a little bit more about what's been put together and designed and decided already, particularly in terms of goals and outcomes?
Yes. So pretty much it's the same. We're just trying to get a temperature check on our homeschooling community. Homeschooling standards are under the purview of the State Board of Education. It's something we haven't touched in a long time. I guess kind of looking at the trajectory of education after COVID, I can imagine people still wanting to use a variety of options and just trying to get ahead of people, feeling supported. So in that, basically just trying to see like what our homeschool community is feeling. Do they need any support? And then how does the DC education system support them? And basically giving an avenue for them to just give us an update about what's going on. So that's really the goal, is just to get an update from representatives from our homeschooling community. And then I guess an outcome could be just once we're done with these panels, see if there are any steps that we need to pick up, any advocacy efforts we need to pick up, or things might just be going really well. And that's kind of our temperature check on that population.
Yeah, no, that's great. So it's more of a finding families to provide primary source data for us than it is finding experts in the community to tell us kind of what they would like to see or what policy changes they would recommend from their research.
Yes, very much so. So far in recruitment, I found mostly families, but I have found one person who is on some kind of national homeschooling association. So trying to figure out where to put her, or it should just be a public witness. And I also found one provider. She's a homeschool mom, but she's also very, she used to be a speech therapist in the DC kind of community, but she now provides almost like supplemental homeschooling support for families in DC. She is another person who I'm inviting. And then I asked Ms. Wade, who previously testified, to provide like the family perspective. But I'm just trying to figure out where to put people. I believe also Ossie is going to come to the working session. I know we wanted to kind of possibly separate the family provider aspect from Ossie, so that that group can speak freely, because Ossie is the kind of, I guess, certifier monitor of homeschooling. So just don't want anyone feeling, like they're being, not saying Ossie would do that, but that they're, anything that they say will be used against them. So definitely having Ossie at the session. Mm-hmm. Which might just be the only panel we might need at the working session. I'm not sure. I'm up to you guys' idea.
Alex, do we have confirmation that Ossie is going to join us at the working session?
So the last that I checked, which was Monday, I think, John Paul was going to be having a conversation with Ossie and Justin about that invitation. So I cannot confirm whether or not the invitation has been accepted or not. As of Monday, I know it was an outstanding agenda item that John Paul was going to be discussing with Ossie and Justin. That could have very much changed in the last 36 hours, though.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be helpful if we can find out if Ossie is committed to coming. That would be great. Carlene, my general take is that it would be great to have Ossie at the working session and to put anybody else who wants to speak in the public meeting, whether as a panelist or as a public witness. And I think, one of the things, we hear from public witnesses all the time who are knowledgeable, thoughtful, have incredibly insightful testimony. So I think there it may be the way I was trying to think about how I might suggest we differentiate. Given that we really want to hear from families and get sort of a pulse on it, I was thinking I might want to stack the panel with families to hear their perspective and invite anyone else who wanted to provide testimony to do so either in writing or to share during the public comment section. But I'm certainly open to thinking about a panel that is mixed. That's just my initial reaction.
Yeah, I would, let's see. I am kind of, let me talk to a couple of the folks just to see what would make, I think everyone I've talked to can be good on either end. I just know the public witnesses are kind of stuck at the 3 minutes, but yeah. And I also need to just kind of list out who's reached like out, because basically I've been like, thank you, just don't know where to put you. So I guess what I can do is just kind of list out who, all the folks that you've sent, Rep. Gazoya sent, the 2-3 people that I've been in contact with, just to see who's who, and then we can work on like the people I've talked to, except for Ms. Wade. I told her she's on the panel, but everyone else I've kind of said like, we're just trying to figure out where to put you, but they're willing to either submit a testimony or participate in some way. So.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I said, that's great. And you didn't hear that. One other thing I'm wondering about is as we think about how to establish some suggested questions. I love that the staff always provides those to us. So I thought maybe we could do them a favor and just brainstorm for a few minutes about the kinds of things on our mind that we want to make sure either we can give them guidance on to provide testimony, both Ossie and any public witnesses, or things we want to make sure that someone asks of these panelists at different sessions. I know for me, one thing I'm curious about for Ossie is to understand, like, how do families find, like, how does OSSI deal with families? Do they ever do proactive outreach, or do they wait for families to call them? How does a family find them? And then what is their relationship with families like? Like, those are the things on my mind, because I will say that I had a conversation with a homeschool parent. This is probably 4 years ago now. And she explained to me that one thing that she struggled with as a homeschool parent was that OSSI's monitoring process required the parent to actually visit OSSI's offices to provide curricular documentation. And she's a parent of 3. And she said, I'm not supposed to bring my children with me, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with my children since I'm their primary educator during the day during this visit. Also, I'm supposed to document health and safety. Is there a reason OSSI doesn't do a home visit? Because they could come see the health and safety things they're looking for. So I want to get at those kinds of questions. Like, how do you deal with families? How do families find you, et cetera?
I'm not sure why I'm raising my hand, but I'm also curious if there's any differentiation between, I would love or hope that there's differentiation between like who's doing monitoring and who's doing technical assistance. Because you do want, families to be able to ask questions, and people to help and provide resources without that, accountability arm looking over you. Because our goal is to just make sure wherever children are receiving education services, it's quality. So I'm just curious about that. Like, are there 2 different entities who do the checks versus who is available for people to call? I like that question about who's like the personnel, like intake. If I know, like on the childcare side, if somebody's interested in starting up a childcare center, there's a multitude of people who kind of can usher them through that process from start to finish. Is that available for individuals who are taking the homeschool option? I'm also curious about just resources, and I'm not sure if that's an OSSI thing or not. But is there equity in the homeschooling space of if there's a family who's interested in taking the option? Is it only limited to families who can afford an extra hand to do extra tutoring? Are there resources available in the community for like social engagement? So yeah, and I guess just in general, what is the monitoring process? What is that like? What are like the cycles of monitoring? How frequently? What's the content? Do families feel like that's meaningful? Do they feel like it's burdensome?
Yeah. Other questions that we might ask of OSSI, since it seems like we're on that track? Alistair, Ruth, I don't know if you have any, or if you're just in transit.
I'm thinking.
Okay. Alex, I mean, one thing I'll say is if there's any way we can create an incentive for OSSI to come, I feel like these are a lot of important questions that we have for OSSI that relate to our role in the standards. So I think, sorry, there's a lot of sirens going by, that we can, if we can get OSSI there in any way, shape, or form, that would be great.
Yes, noted. And I will let you all know when I have an update on that. But as I said, last I checked, it was still outstanding.
Great. What about for families? Anything in particular that's on your mind that we want to make sure we ask families to either prepare, maybe the conversation you had with Ms. Wade already?
Yeah, I'm curious what led them to take the homeschool option. What's keeping them in the homeschool option, how they feel supported by the city. And that's to be everything from DC government resources, private resources, but then also like communities with taking the option. I'm curious about, their interactions with the standards and how they feel about, like what's in place. I think that's at the moment all I can think of. I imagine some of those stories will lead to follow-up questions.
Yeah, I concur. You hit on the ones that were of interest to me, in particular the what led you there, and then what are your interactions with the sort of requirements that students in schools have, like the standards. I also have a question about the way they treat assessment. Like, do they use commercial assessments? Do they use curricular aligned assessments? How are they gauging what their children know at the start of a unit, middle of a unit, end of a unit? And is that something they feel like they have adequate information and resources for, or might benefit from more?
I'm also curious about like some of the not just special education resources, but I guess related services, if any. Like, what are the access points to like mental health supports? What are the access points for special education services? Then I guess also like, libraries, recs, how does that support their needs? How do those entities support their needs? And those items might just be out of the purview of the State Board of Education, but it might just be kind of good feedback. Like I saw the library hearing and the DPR hearing recently, and I was just kind of like, there's probably some information that can be contributed to those hearings on our end, not necessarily in our purview, but feedback in regards to like, what does services look like in the middle of the day for families who either are young families or families who may be engaged in homeschooling.
Yeah. One other question I had that is not so much about what we would ask folks on the panel, but related to the public comment period. Like, I know sometimes when we send out our agenda or we put up our agenda, we get folks who help amplify it to make sure that we hear testimony from folks in the affected communities. And I think of like last time when we knew we were talking about the star rating, we heard from a lot of different teachers, many of whom were Empower Ed fellows. So Empower Ed clearly helped amplify that particular item and make sure that folks affected by it came to testify. I wonder if there are thoughts on how we might welcome folks who may come to testify about our panel or the topic of homeschooling, standards for homeschooling, families, needs, and connection to homeschooling, and whether there's anyone we might send it to help amplify it.
Yeah, I was thinking about like I just kind of asked Ms. Wade, like, sorry, Ms. Wade, I want you to testify, but also like, are you able to, if you know, connection to any families, to invite them? She said she would. The individual who's a service provider, I've asked her to share with her family. So basically any inlets. I know you have a connection to a collective.
Yeah.
There's a Facebook group that I need to connect with that may have some families who are willing to testify.
Cool. I think you're right. I think if we send it to the folks we've already made outreach to and ask them to share it with their networks, then we'll likely get a few more folks in public comment. Carlene, is there anything else you need from us in order to move ahead with this, or any other way we can support and be of help?
Definitely inviting folks to come and testify for public comment period. I just think right now, probably like all of us, I just need extra hands. So, but I feel like once I type the first kind of invite email, like, hey, you can testify either by calling or by, in person, I can just kind of copy and paste and send it to the other folks. So I think just for me, I probably just have to go through my email and organize people who've sent people and then reach out, which I think I can do. It's just a matter of sitting down and doing it.
Yeah, no, I hear that. The list of things that I still have to do and sit down and do is so long.
And Carlene, when we talk on Friday morning, we can talk through process and what might make sense for you to continue to do, or me just to take over from you to lessen some of the stuff.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, I think that's a good reminder. So what I would do between now and Friday is just kind of list out who I've either been people referred me to, what the status is of me contacting them, and then that visual will help me with figuring out where help is needed. So my goal is to come to the table with you on Friday with that information.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much for all of the work on this, Carlene. I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be nice to have a panel so dedicated to hearing from parents and families of students, and just getting a look at a part of education we as a board haven't spent a whole lot of time on. So I appreciate that. I was going to go to Alistair next, but it appears we have lost him. So I'm going to turn to social studies and hope that Alistair rejoins us and that we can move then to literacy and some of the other topics. So I put a couple of hyperlinks in on the social studies updates. There are sort of 4. One is the technical writing committee progress and the current outline of their framework for the standards. And by that, I mean, they've given the elementary grades some themes. They've given the middle grades some course descriptions. The high school is the least developed at this point because, to be frank, they are still working with the 4-course sequence that is part of the graduation requirements. But there is an ongoing discussion between the members of the writing committee and the folks at OSSE about whether there's a required sequence for these courses or if there's a way to write the standards so that there's a little flexibility to think about how we might provide more continuity between the 7th and 8th grade study of American history and the high school study of US history. So that's one update, is that came from the technical writing committee. It was provided by Sarah, who is a member of the SISAC and also a member of the technical writing committee at the SISAC meeting. We also heard from Melanie and Michael, who are writers as well as members of the SISAC, and they all sort of provided a little color commentary. If you look at the SISAC meeting notes, you get a little bit more of their color commentary that they provided during the meeting, and that's also linked in the agenda. The SISAC meeting itself was great. We spent a good portion of it talking about the updates from the writing committee. Just by background, the SISAC met in its initial arrangement from June to December, once a month for 2 hours. For this year, while the writing committee was doing its work, we didn't think it made sense to meet monthly. So we structured 4 quarterly meetings, and the first 3 were hour long. So the hour goes by pretty quickly. And a lot of it was taken up with the updates from the writing committee. But we also talked about this idea of a social studies community. We'd asked the SISAC members to fill out a survey about what kind of resources they used as a social studies teacher, whether they were part of groups or associations, either locally, regionally, or nationally. And if there were any kinds of groups or resources they wish existed, but that they didn't feel like they had access to. So we shared the results of that survey. And then we had a really good conversation about how we might create some of the resources that weren't there. And then we also talked about some resources that, as it turns out, are there, but some folks in the room knew about and others did not. And so we started to create those bridges and connections. We're doing this mostly so that when we roll out the standards after their adoption, that we can continue to build on, like, who's in the room in the world of social studies in DC, who can teachers call on as they get ready to use the new standards, and how can they support that work going forward. I'll stop there and see if there's any questions about those 2 things, and then I'll talk about OSSE's timeline and the NASB article. Okay, Ruth, I'm seeing your comment here. Are the K-5 topic categories listed the new topics from the SISAC outline? Do you mean the guiding principles?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I went into your email, right? And it said under social studies updates, TWC progress and standards frameworks. And when I open it up, it says technical writing committee update for the SISAC. To date, here's the TWC progress for building out. And then it says like K is community identity and diversity. 1 is representation, fairness, and equity. 2 is agency. Are those the new categories that were proposed by the SISAC?
No, these are categories proposed by the writing committee. The SISAC provided the guiding principles, and we didn't get into what each grade should do at all.
I see. Okay, but so these are, Got it. So these are not the old ones, these are new ones, but in this case, these are new ones coming from OSSI in response to the CISAC proposals.
Exactly right.
Um,
I will say I have not done the side-by-side comparison, but I am certain that limitations and privilege framed with intersectionality is not in the 2006 standards.
So here's the only thing I want to say, and I know I'm kind of a obsessive on this, and I keep saying it. I am concerned that we don't have the word democracy, and we don't have anything that is about building civic understanding of the democratic system and democratic values and democratic principles. I just think it's so important right now, and it also is. It's something that people look to in the social studies standards. And I worry about how it's sort of getting lost in other things. So I've been raising that a while, and I'm just going to raise it again here.
Yeah.
I
know
just
it-
hope
I know
that can
it's
be
a-
brought back and
Yeah, I know it's a huge concern of yours, Ruth. What I would caution against is that I don't think that any of us, myself included, can definitively say it's not there yet. And the reason I say that is right now you see that this document is so new that, for instance, second grade, it says agency, rights and responsibilities. Second graders explore how. I don't
no, I totally get it. I'm not, I'm not trying to like go crazy or raise red flags. I'm concerned because it didn't jump out as much as I would have liked in the proposal, which is why we did the resolution. But
So Ruth, let me pause for a second because I want to clarify for Alistair and
okay,
Carlene that the language Ruth wanted that is in the resolution is in the guiding principles as well. This is an ongoing debate Ruth and I have. It is in the guiding principles and it is in the resolution exactly verbatim.
yes. And the one concern I have is the result, in my judgment, and now this, I just want to raise it in the context of this, is that it doesn't end up feeling like that idea of democracy and what's the history of democracy and the way in which democracy was built, that democracy, building that system, the values of that system, the importance of that system, didn't come through in that as fundamental as other things. And that's what I'm concerned about. So I just want to keep it on the screen. That's all.
Okay. I will say, I think that the next opportunity we'll have to have input into the standards comes with OSSI's deadline. So the CISAC will get a look at the draft of standards at the end of July. But the latest update from OSSI is that they believe they may have a draft to provide to the board as early as August. That was a note I got from John Paul after a conversation with OSSI this week. It said social studies working group might be wrapped up by August. So
Wow.
I think we can expect that end of August, we'll have a draft that is ready for both our comment as well as our engagement with public comment,
Great.
which you'll see in the next steps here. So I think that's something we can talk about next. The only other thing I wanted to update folks on, if there are no other questions on the Technical Writing Committee and CISAC, is the NASB article. So I'll stop in case anyone else has questions about Technical Writing Committee or CISAC. Okay. So thanks to Alex and our great staff's work and relationship with NASB, we were invited to write a piece about the work the state board has done on social studies for NASB's publication, The Standard. So Alex and I have been working on that. We sent comments back to the editorial folks at NASB today. This was the cumulative writing draft that was very tricky in the Word document, but I think it's a great draft. I'm super excited that NASB invited us to write it, that NASB's excited about it. I think it's a nice chance to showcase all the work our board did to create a process to revise standards where none exists in law, to make that process as inclusive of community participation as possible and making sure that community is diverse and representative. and in making sure that we had a strong working relationship between the board and OSSI in order to make sure that the standards get done on a reasonable timeline and are actually adoptable when they are done. So Alex, would you add anything else about the draft at this point?
I wouldn't add anything else to the draft at this point. I would say just some additional framing for why we were invited at this time. The issue in September, the standard issue in September, is going to focus on like anti-racism and its inclusion in standards and curriculum. And Jessica, you may have said that. I may have completely missed it, and so I apologize. But so that was kind of the nexus, or the kind of the reasoning for why we were invited to kind of talk about our work. And Jessica, Valerie actually just responded to me via email. I think you were accidentally dropped off, so I'll forward it to you. But she also raised some other questions, and now I think this even has more relevance too, now that we're seeing a lot of executives of states talking about critical race theory and whether or not it should or should not be included, and what that looks like, and how state boards actually interact with that as well. And so I think that's something else now that comes into play as well when we're thinking about the framing of this piece. But overall, I think, as Jessica noted, this is a really wonderful opportunity for us as the DC State Board to feature our work in this area on kind of a national level.
Yeah, I think that that's super relevant, Alex. For better or for worse, we're going to get drawn into this debate, and I'd rather us be on the side of what we know our neighbors and constituents care a lot about, which is this commitment to anti-racist framing of our standards. So I'm excited that we're going to get a chance to showcase that work in NASB. Let's talk then about the notion of envisioning a public process. So Ruth, I know this is something you care a lot about as well, as this notion of public comment on the draft standards. So I have an upcoming meeting with Malayo to start talking about preparing for press about new standards. But I also want us to start thinking about, what does an ideal public comment look like on a standards process? 3 things occur to me. 1, we want to make sure that we get this out for broad public comment. And we want to make sure we get comment from people most affected by it. So I definitely want to make sure we get comment from teachers and curriculum folks at schools. I also want to make sure we get the chance for students, especially high school students, to comment on the changes, because I think that's super important. We've heard a lot from our Student Advisory Council about their experiences in social studies, and I'd like to make sure that that's true. So I want to get out broad comment. Second, I want to make sure that we're thoughtful about at the level at which we ask for comments. One thing we committed to OSSI is that we were giving them guiding principles. They would write standards aligned with those guiding principles. And when we provided our feedback as a state board, we would ensure that our feedback was centered around that. Like, did you accomplish the goals of the guiding principles? So Ruth, to your point, our guiding principles are very clear about the through line that needs to be there on democratic citizenship and the promise of democracy that is thus far unfulfilled. And so when we review the standards, we'll want to make sure we're attending to that in our comments. What I wonder about is, what's the right level to ask the public to comment on? And then my third thing that I'm wondering about is, I can imagine that there are members of the public who may have generalized comments, but who are not going to want to go line by line through every standard. And so any ideas on how we might mitigate that? We don't want people to just write such broad comments like, I hate these, or these are great. But I also don't expect that a general member of the public is going to read through pre-K through 12 standards line by line to provide their thoughts. So those are the thoughts on my mind. What are you all thinking about?
Hey, Jessica.
Hi.
I think bringing in my way of solving things, which you all know now. I think I would find it helpful to know where we are relative to where other people stand on this, other states' answers for these things, and just as a benchmark. I don't know if that's something you know off the top of your head.
like how other states have solicited feedback?
Yeah.
I know from our very early interviews, and Alex, feel free to chime in on anything I miss here. Some states put out like a public website with the standards and an opportunity for folks to make line item comments. Some folks put out, did like sessions. So they had public meetings and had people comment in that way. So they did a presentation on the new standards and took public feedback. I think there's also, a lot of ways that our own district, and I mean that to mean DC, puts out like regulations for public comment. And so they put them out and they ask for people to write pros comments. So those are sort of the three ways that I've seen people do this.
Thank you. That's helpful. And then I wonder, what are ways that we would engage the folks whose voices are not usually represented, right, by that process. So, and then the timeline that, sorry, I'm just now adding more questions to yours, Jessica, but and then the timeline to do that, right? I mean, one thing that's the end after decisions were made, that to make sure that the right people get invited actively to the table, or feel like that the comment period is accessible to them at the right times, right? And not after things have already been decided. My sense is that a lot of that has to do with the implementation of how the engagement process works, and not just the design.
Yeah, I think that's right. So, if we know that we're going to have standards in August and we'd like to be voting on standards by spring, we have a fair amount of time. I think I raised this in a prior meeting. What I don't want to do is have an engagement window that is so long as to make it difficult for us to move ahead with adopting the standards. So if we get standards in September, I would love to have us engage in the fall so that we could be providing synthesized feedback to OSSI, both public feedback and board feedback, by the end of fall, and be ready for OSSI to return something to us, say as early as December or as late as January. Because I think any more than a few weeks of public feedback time may have diminishing returns, is my thought.
Yeah. Yep. And I don't think my comment was more like we should extend it, but rather how do we make sure that folks feel like they're brought in at the right time, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I guess that's my question about level. So I wonder about, like, I can envision how we get feedback from teachers. Teachers are expected to use these standards as part of their work. Same thing for curriculum folks and school district leaders. So I can envision what that looks like. Like, those are folks who are trained in the work of learning standards and comfortable looking at a standards document and providing line item comments. How do we best engage a parent who is not an education professional, right? So I don't want to lump all parents together, but I can imagine there are lots of parents who may have thoughts that they'd like to raise on the standards, but don't want to go line by line and give us feedback on individual wording. So are there ways we can both engage people who are often left out of the process, but not ask them to engage in a way that is outside what they might feel is the realm of their expertise or the realm of their interest? Like, maybe that's the best place for like a presentation and focus group discussion, or a presentation and follow-up surveys.
So I have two thoughts, Jessica.
Yeah.
One is slightly reacting to the statement you just made. I thinking about the timeline that you're suggesting, fall for solicitation and consolidation to deliver it to OSSI so they have enough time to get something back to us. I think there's an opportunity that we that students and teachers will be going back to school. And I think there's a place and a possible space for members to also use this as an opportunity to maybe go into schools and potentially go into classrooms where there are students, social studies classrooms, to kind of engage on some of the key themes that might be brought up in these new standards to get reactions from both those constituent groups. On the parent front and more community front, one thing I think we could do is, one, look back at the initial survey that we sent out at the beginning of the SISAC, and think about those members of the community and parents who responded and said, I don't really like what the current standards are. This is why I don't like it. And go back and say, hey, have we corrected some of the things that we heard from the beginning that were flags from parents or community members? And kind of just reacting to that and saying that, yes, we've worked to address that. This was raised to us a year or so ago. And then I do think that there would be value in doing some sort of community forum presentation, in particular, communities. And I think that those details could be identified at another time, but I think there's value in that.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to come to Ruth and then to Carlene.
Two questions. One is, I just want to make sure I have this right. So the board will get a draft of the standards. So sounds like almost late July. Do we then do a response on that? And then they become available more broadly to everybody for parenting, for public engagement in September? Is that what I'm understanding?
I think, as I understood it, what we've agreed to with OSSI is that the SISAC will get a draft in late July. I certainly think the board, has every right to take a look at them at the same time, but they're being provided at that point as an agreed upon comment period for the SISAC. And then OSSI will bring a final draft for public comment to the board and to the public. As I understand it, the writing group will be done with its work by the end of August, and then we will get that draft. So I am calling that September.
Okay, so the one thing I want to raise is we definitely have a big overlap of priorities in terms of how the Accountability and Assessment Committee is dealing with the STAR framework, because September is supposed to be the big month for outreach, having meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's going to flow into October with a working meeting early October and the public meeting mid-October. So
I had not realized that we had the public meeting and working session agreed upon. That's news to me, so that's good to know.
yeah. Now, I will say, part of the agreement was also that, if people didn't feel ready, because, there was concerns about making sure people would have plenty of time to engage. And, Jacques and I and the committee in general was very much for, let's really try, with the new timeline, stuff would be ready, people could engage in the summer, and so far as that worked for them, and go full tilt in September. And people generally felt then, okay, that's good, we could vote in October. But I did say, we said, but if people don't feel comfortable, we can push it back until November. So that's sort of how it has been left at public meetings and in our timeline. So
Okay.
that's.
Well, I imagine then this is something that I'll need to bring to leadership to just share. This is the latest and greatest we've heard from OSSI, and how did they want to handle potential overlapping
I think
feedback?
that's good. That makes sense.
Okay. The other thing, and this is something I think is open for discussion with OSSI. OSSI has some responsibility to get public feedback on the standards. I think we had discussed that this would be a joint effort between the board and OSSI. It's certainly something we could punt on if that's not like, if the board is taking on too much in the fall, this could be OSSI's outreach only. What I would caution us against is that if we don't take part in the process, it will restrict us from having much say in the process. And I would hate to do that.
I'm not sure how to think about that. I think that's a really good caution. one thing I will raise is when we did the ESSA standards, around the STAR framework in 2017, I guess. OSSI ran the engagement process, and then we sort of co-sponsored these specific meetings in our wards. Now, it was in 100 ways not a great process and not adequate in my judgment. But insofar as this might be something where there's more overlap in terms of viewpoints and the kinds of responses and outreach we want and expect, that might be a way to do it, where they're doing the legwork, much more of the legwork. We're free to do it. We don't want to give up that right, but they handled a lot of the logistics.
Yeah, I think to your point, Ruth, is that, as I understand it, a number of members of the board felt quite dissatisfied with that process. And also the ESSA standards had, I think, and this may be outside my realm of expertise, but had different outlined roles for the board and OSSI on that. Like here we had already negotiated with OSSI that they would do some public engagement, we would do some public engagement. The expectation is that we would both do it. I don't know if that had been the case with ESSA.
I mean, I came into it somewhat midway as well, with sort of a set of things, I guess, sort of predetermined, but what I would just say is really what I did is that they sort of organized the meetings and then we attended them. Now, and you know, introduced them. And no, people were not happy with it. We had a very minor role, but the distinction that I would make is that was an issue on which there were very different views on the board and in OSSI. And so the way in which OSSI was engaging was very, it didn't work with what a lot of members wanted to talk about and who they wanted to talk with. I'm not sure that's the same here. So I'm just throwing it out as an option. That's really
yeah. I'll offer two things. One, I think it would be a bad idea for us to let OSSI take this on solo for two reasons. One, the point you have raised twice during our meeting, Ruth, which is this democratic through line. I think we will give up a lot of power to call out things on which there have been, I won't say the differences of opinion, but different feelings about the relative emphasis. And then two, we have made the social studies work a real center point of our work in the past few years. And for OSSI, I think it has been an important process, but not a center point of their work. So I think it would be just a shame to sort of push it off. So
I agree with you. I'm not suggesting that. I don't want to be misunderstood. I was just saying there is that model where that's all.
Okay.
But I don't disagree. I don't disagree with what you're saying at all.
I will commit to bringing it to Emily and Zachary to raise the timing overlap concerns between two committees' work. And we'll see what happens. Carlene, did you have something else to raise? Because I apologize. I saw your hand go down.
Oh, it's okay. No, I knew my places after Ruth. I came on the back end. I had to grab a package for my neighbor, but I think I was hearing about community engagement. I do agree. I think what both of you are saying of having a role in it, because watching a lot of OSSI's engagement on things is a lot of times like it was posted on their website, and then people who are in certain communities, respond to whatever the solicitation for feedback is, but it's often not, even for folks who are interested, not a lot of information. I was just pitching and happy to help with this for like on the Ward 8 side of possibly thinking about our civic associations and where appropriate, like government-based political clubs, not sure, ethically engage them around that. Because I think a lot of those groups, especially in Ward 8, have individuals who are kind of gatekeepers around history, culture, philosophies that I think they want to contribute around social studies standards. They might need some framing, but I think they would love to talk about what the future of civic engagement could look like in DC. So I
love that idea. I think that's great. Okay, we'll have more time to talk about this after the recess. I just wanted to start getting some thoughts together now so I can start maybe sketching out a draft plan for us and present that to leadership and confront this sort of timeline issue so we can figure out some possible paths forward. Alistair, did you want to chime in again? Okay, I saw the highlight on your shape, but did not hear your voice. Okay, so that was all I had for social studies. I want to turn this now. Oh, I was going to turn it to Alistair, who we lost again. Okay, I'm going to burn a few minutes while we wait for him to come back. Alex, can I turn to you to talk a little bit about the latest and greatest conversations you've had with Alistair on this connecting across difference? He sent me an email, so I can start there if not, but I feel like you two recently discussed this.
I actually think that where Alistair and I are at with this is probably the same place that Jessica, you and Alistair are with on it,
Okay.
with respect to timing. Oh, and when we think the panel might be hosted and with whom the panel might be hosted for, the audience. I think all of that, we're all on the same page.
Great.
Maybe we can have Alistair talk us through it.
Alistair, are you there now?
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Great. Sorry about that. I just wanted to, if I may, just follow up on Carlene's point. I've been thinking a lot about sort of
Oh, Alistair, now we're having a hard
building
time hearing you.
partnering with community. Okay. Give me 1 second. Hello?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry about this. So what Dr. Reed said, I just wanted to follow up on, because I think this idea of partnering with trusted community leaders who already have relationships is such a good one of our job, thinking about sort of how we frame the conversation that they lead actually to get feedback is something that I think would be such an interesting and important case study for not just this piece, but even when we think about every aspect of our work, when we think about community engagement, actually, instead of saying, hey, here are the times that you need to come show up to give us feedback in a 3-minute setting, right? Rather think about kind of ways that are more accessible for our constituents to be able to provide that and to spread that out in a more organic way to get feedback in more targeted areas of our work as well. I find really interesting. So I don't know if that's what you meant, Dr. Reed, but that's what I heard and where my mind went.
Yes.
And so for so Alex, were you teeing up the conversation around the understanding difference panel?
Yeah, I was starting to do some of that, as was Jessica. And so I think the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think I wanted folks' feedback, right, as we've, well, just to set the context from our last conversations, we've gotten feedback from the Student Advisory Committee that they're interested in this, at least the ones who are members of the Student Advisory Committee. We've had some pushback, right, in part because of how close this would be to Councilmember McDuffie's push forward around legislating a certain curriculum, right, that I think may or may not be perceived as us trying to do this in a way that doesn't necessarily align with our ongoing work with revising the social studies standards. And I think another piece then, and Representative Sutter, you raised this earlier in the NASB piece that you're writing with Alex as well, is this now kind of top headline conversation around critical race theory, right? And so kind of putting all of this together, right, and creating something that feels relevant, timely, and also helpful for informing the way that we revise the social studies standards, perhaps, or in the way that we actually weave certain ways of teaching through various coursework. Representative Setter and I had a conversation around kind of reframing this panel to be around ways to equip students with understanding difference, right? And within that include these broader themes, but are not restricted to these broader themes around ethnic studies, around critical race theory, around effective pedagogy. And I wanted, especially from you, Dr. Reed and Representative Weinberg, your feedback on.
Alistair, you dropped out there. We're having a very hard time hearing you. We got pretty far, but then you asked for something from me and something from Representative Wattenberg, and we didn't hear you.
Okay. I wanted feedback on that framing from Dr. Reed and Representative Weinberg.
Alistair, can you say it again so we know exactly what we're
Yes.
commenting on?
I am so sorry, everybody. Framing the panel around understanding, preparing students to understand difference, and critical race theory, ethnic studies, effective pedagogy are some of the ingredients that we may or may not consider, but are not, those are not the only ingredients through which we think about the broader goal of teaching our students how to understand difference.
And you're saying we would have a panel that would inform us on how that's done?
So I'm going to chime in for a second, Alistair.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we had talked about all the ways we might host this panel. And one of the thoughts we came up with is the main audience we thought might benefit from this would be teachers. And so we happen to have a captive audience of about 30 some teachers on the writing committee and about 20 some teachers on the CISAC. Could we specifically invite those folks, but also stream it or record it so that other folks could benefit from it, and have it directed at social studies educators on this question of their capacity for helping students connect across difference, as well as their ways in which our panelists might talk about the students' experiences of having not had opportunities to connect across difference and craving that sort of knowledge and insight.
I think that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Carlene, I'm sorry, I didn't want, are you done?
Oh, I was just gonna say, because yes, because I think it'll knock out the making sure that we link the two into the standards. That was all.
So I think that makes a lot of sense to aim at the teachers because they will get useful input and we will get useful feedback. The one thing I would recommend, and I think this is a question, I think we're all, I don't know that this is right. I am not for, I think I'm for keeping this insofar as we can out of the whole debate about critical race theory. The Republicans are like churning all of this good stuff that schools are doing into this crazy CRT. And I don't think we should play into that. I think we should talk in just very straightforward English about what we are doing, which is we want our students to understand difference. We want them to understand the histories of different ethnic groups and how they tie into the whole country's history and how the country's growth depended on that. To talk about systemic racism, to just be very clear about what we are trying to promote here and not get it sort of all caught up in this weirdo conversation that they're trying to create around this word that has not a lot of meaning except at the academy level. So that would be my recommendation. Alistair, does
So-
that make sense or not make sense, or?
I think I get it. I think part of it is this, right? Part of it is, are we going to be pulled into that conversation regardless? And so would it be more strategic and better for our students if we create these conversations that frame what, and we get a step ahead to define what critical race theory, for example, and ethnic studies mean to us relative to our system before, and shape the narrative from the start, or not, right? I mean, I don't think I have a crystal ball to predict what will happen, but I do think that those words to me are not dirty words, and I don't think we should treat them as such.
They're not, I guess what I would say, and I agree with you, I don't have a crystal ball, so I'm also not super strong in either direction. But what I would say is they're not dirty words, but they're also, until the conservatives brought it into this discussion, they weren't really words that were so relevant for K-12. And you can now see this, the people that are kind of our side of people that are trying to explain and what we're doing and defend this are trying to clarify what it is that we're doing, and that it's not critical race theory, which is this academic theory. Not that that's wrong. It's just not what we're doing. We're doing some very straightforward stuff that we can speak about using very understandable terms. So that's all. I will just leave it there.
I'll just throw out sort of two responses to that. One is, for better or for worse, our guiding principles actually reference critical race theory and include a footnote, because we did mention it in our guiding principles as an important basis upon which we encourage the standards to take a critical examination of history through a lens of the structural inequities that exist. Part of that is we have a bunch of academics on the CISAC, and we have a bunch of folks who are familiar with the term critical race theory. So for better or for worse, we actually do, if you just do a quick search and find in our guiding principles, it comes right up. So the second thing I'd say to that is, in the draft letter I shared with members today, and I sincerely apologize that it took till today. To Carlene's point, I could use 10 more hours in a day and a few more hands. But in the draft I sent this morning, I tried to both take a straightforward writing approach to what we do in our standards, frankly, what Wisconsin does in its standards, coming from the gentleman from Wisconsin, and what we're trying to accomplish. And John Paul, I think, thoughtfully raised a concern over whether we should wade into this debate. I understand he's brought this up to leadership as well. And my take on it is, bring it. Like, this is the stuff that will destroy our democracy if we let it, and our students deserve us to fight it. So I think that, Alistair, having the panel is essential. I'm super excited about doing it the way the teachers wanted to in August or September. I'm also super excited about making sure we advertise it however makes sense given the context of the time. So if this debate and discussion has survived multiple news cycles and is still with us in August, I think we should be thoughtful about how to situate it. And I understand Malayo is giving some thought to talking points and framing for how we talk about our standards in light of this debate. So that's my reaction. Alistair, is there anything else you need from us at this point on this topic to help move it forward?
Yes. So yes. Is there Representative Sutter, may I get your help to connect with the teachers to set a time and a date? And I think that would work best for them, because I think that the panelists, there's a lot that we can pull from, but I think they would be easier to pin down around the teachers than the other way around, actually.
Okay, I can definitely do that. We can reach out to the CISAC, the writing committee members, using some of the same language we used in the CISAC meeting, and the language you wrote out in your email to me. And we'll maybe what we'll do is I will ask you for some dates that work. We can ask staff for some dates that work, and then we can provide those dates to the teachers. Alex,
Perfect.
you got your hand up?
I was gonna say yes, that makes sense. For some reason, I thought the raise hand also had like a thumbs up emoji. But yeah, I think let's get some dates that we know at least work for you, Alistair, for Jessica, other members of this committee, and internally that don't. And then from there, we can bring that to the CISAC. Let's make sure we all can be there first.
Great. All right. I will take on coordinating that with you, Alistair, and with our colleagues. And then we'll go
Thank you.
out to the CISAC and writing committee from there.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Anything else on that, or shall we get your literacy recap? I want to be mindful of your connectivity. I don't want to risk it.
No, I'm sorry. And actually, this one is mostly, I'm going to punt it to Alex, because I had some back and forth with John Paul, and we built out a list of organizations and contact info to send the survey to. And I was hoping, Alex, that you might have an update for us on whether those got sent out by the staff and how many responses we got. And if it's very low, right, I think then we come up with a game plan for how we broaden that, and I can start pinging folks individually to respond. But where that is, if you know, Alex.
Yeah, for sure. So we sent out the survey to the list of folks that Alistair mentioned on June 9th, I think. So maybe 2 Wednesdays ago. I can't recall how many total people or organizations were on the list, probably more than 20, but less than 40, I would say. John Paul did do like a follow-up email with those same organizations this past Monday. It is my understanding that as of early this week, we did not have a very large number of responses, possibly 5, definitely under 10 of the organizations responding. So I think, Alistair, if you could do some bumping to some of the organizations that you know and just say, hey, you should have received an email from John Paul, the executive director of the SAFE board, with a link to our survey. Would appreciate if you could fill that out. I'm not sure, Alistair, if you were BCC'd on that original email that John Paul sent out or not.
I was not. And if you are willing to, Alex, to forward that to me and the other members of this committee, that would be super helpful.
Yes, for sure. I will do that. But we did get that survey out. And if you give me 1 second, let me see if I can find, I want to say like we have like maybe 5 or so folks that have responded. I cannot tell you who's responded at this point. I'm not logged into the back end part of the survey, but to answer your questions, yes, it's gone out. There's been a reminder, but not too many folks have responded.
Okay, it's a busy time. I don't think we'll make it in time to get the appendix into the literacy strategy or literacy plan, but I still think this information would be really helpful. So if you could send that around, I'll send out some individual pings, and I may check in with some of you to see if you know someone from the other organizations where I don't.
Okay. And Alistair, just to clarify, do you have a copy of that distribution list that we sent the survey to?
Would you send that around as well? I don't know if you used the Google sheet that I had made or had built a new one.
Okay, I do think it was the Google sheet that you built out and we may have just filled it in, but I will make sure that either way it is reshared.
Great, thank you. And just for everyone else, I heard from Aussie today that their literacy plan for the state had a soft launch, and would love folks' feedback on it. I know that's not directly part of this committee's work necessarily as it relates directly, but I think one thing that I would love for us to be able to work on is to kind of comb through it and provide some feedback for how we both collaborate with Aussie as partners to fulfill the goal laid out in the plan, and then also to think ahead as to how we build this out in the future, and do so in a way that I think where can we improve it, right? I think is still a very important and interesting question to me.
Sorry, I started talking on mute. Is there any sort of form that they're looking for feedback, or like this is already a done deal, but it would still be helpful for us to provide reactions to Aussie?
Yeah, I think it's the latter.
Okay, so maybe something we can all do is agree, like by a date certain, to read through and provide some reactions. And I don't know, Alistair, is it asking too much if we can send those reactions to you in an email? And then
that would be super, actually. I would love that.
Okay. So it sounds like this was the soft launch. I'm looking at the email from Ashley. It doesn't look like there's a date for a hard launch. Did she give you any more insights into that?
Nope.
Okay. So today's June 23rd. It's graduation week. We get the retreat on Friday. So could we say by like before we break for recess, so like before the July public meeting, we'll provide our feedback to Alistair? And Alistair, maybe you can make a note and send us a reminder, like, or bring it up at the working session, like reminder. You said you'd provide that feedback. Please. Okay, cool.
Right.
That gives us a couple of weeks to find some, free time in all our lives, but to review that and send you some feedback to compile and send on to Aussie. Cool.
Great, thank you. And I think our in some ways our even if we get over 10, and I think we can bump up the response rates from our survey to over 10, it'll help inform the plan that's been laid out, right? And so I think there's a few pieces that can come together around our next conversation with Aussie about the plan.
Great. If there's any orgs on the list that I added that I may have forgotten about, Alistair, that are helpful, like that you'd like me to do some outreach to, I'm happy to do that.
Great.
I think I might have put Little Lights. I might have put For Love of Children. So happy to reach out to folks there as follow-up if need be.
Yes. Okay. Great.
Great.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, let's in the spirit of giving people back time, the two things I put under new business, I'd just love to touch on quickly and see if anyone else has anything to raise. One of the things that we had put in our work plan that we would start in the fall is this codifying the state process for review and revision of standards. We've also made a budget ask of council to add in money for FTE to help us have a staff person whose focus is the review of academic standards. So Alex, I know you mentioned this was something you were eager to help with. My hope is that we can bring this back to our committee in September after the recess and get started on it, maybe using the NASB article as the jumping off point for it. Since we'll have already listed out some pieces of processes we did, we might use that as the start point. And then one of the things we said we would do is public outreach, asking which kind of standards need to be updated. And I think it's quite clear that that's something that we'll need to wait for a little while, because it feels like there's a lot of public outreach in the fall. And so maybe, maybe it's something we tack on as a last question on the social studies standards responses, but maybe it's something we save until December, November or December after these other pieces are done. So I just wanted to raise that's on the work plan, and it's something that is on my radar as what I'd like to get us going on in September. I also wanted to figure out if there are other opportunities we might use when we get to meet with Dr. Grant to raise the opportunity to keep working on DC education standards and DC teaching and learning. Ossie's done a lot of teaching and learning work around reading and math, not so much on other things. And it would be really great if we can harness Dr. Grant's new tenure to talk about what perspective the board takes with the way Ossie might handle teaching and learning education standards going forward. So those are just two things I wanted to drop there that I hope we can think about. Anything else on people's minds for consideration of the committee? I know we talked about digital learning, we talked about service. Is there anything else that's lingering for you or you're feeling like might be worth us taking up after the recess?
I'll chime in. I'm excited about Alistair's work around literacy and what will come out of that, because I just really think for DC to have the resources that we have, our kids should be reading through the roof. And so I'm looking forward to seeing whatever, results around the comprehensive plan. And then I'm not sure, hopefully within my time on the board, I'll see us begin to implement that in some way. So definitely continue focusing on literacy after the break.
Awesome.
That's really exciting for me to hear, Dr. Reed. I think there's a lot for us to take on to move the needle from where we sit, right? But I think each time that we've really focused in on one piece of it, we've been able to turn some heads and put a spotlight on it, right? And so I think the next spotlight I would like to put on around this is this plan, right? That is also determining how we spend a sizable chunk of money, and that not a lot of people have been involved with, at least the last time around, or even this time around as well.
Awesome. All right, then I am not in the business of keeping people longer than we have business to attend to. Alex, you get the final word.
I just wanted to make sure that my understanding is correct, that this committee has no funding requests for this current fiscal year for any projects.
If we have funds left over, I would love to back up one of what Dr. Reed put up as a suggestion of kind of bringing in community organizations and community leaders for feedback, and think about how we might use funds for that in a way. I don't know if they are right. I mean, if we ask one of the community organizations to lead a focus group, it might not be. I think it would be, if we have the funds, thoughtful to actually be able to, support them to do that.
And Alistair, are you thinking about that? So I know the state board doesn't have grant making authority, so we can't hand out community grants, but are you thinking about other ways we might use the funds to support community involvement?
Yeah, if it were a contract to fulfill a particular thing. I don't know if that works or if we've done that in the past. And I don't know, Dr. Reed, if that's what you meant or had in mind when you were thinking about gathering feedback from folks, but I would find that so powerful for a few different parts of our work.
Yeah, well, actually, thank you. You're teaching me how to delegate work. I was thinking for the board reps to do it, but I like your approach of if there's a way to get extra hands in collecting the feedback in any of our work, that's always helpful, because sometimes we're really stretched thin across our wards. But I was just thinking if the relationships that we have in our own wards with just some of the civic associations, reach out to them and schedule a time. But I like the idea of possibly getting some extra hands into the work if necessary.
Alistair, can you remind us, when are the budget requests due?
I think that was directed at me, but
I'm sorry, Alex.
you're fine. You're totally fine, Jessica. Do not worry about it. So the money needs to be spent before the end of the fiscal year. The limitations we have would be, we are going on recess. And so I think it's John Paul's hope that if there are any particular budget requests that we'd like to make that you all would like to make as a committee, that it's done so before the recess, such that any procurement that might need to happen can happen over the recess, so that when you get back, if a contract needs to be awarded, it would be ready to go.
Okay.
And I think, Jessica, you probably are the most familiar out of the folks on this call right now with
procurement,
the procurement process and how tedious and lengthy it can be to secure a vendor for any type of work.
Yeah. So I want to repeat what I think I hear Alistair and Carlene saying, and then see if we think that this is even a reasonable thing to try to pursue, to understand if there's a way to do procurement. So I think I'm understanding that in order to get maximum feedback on things like the social studies standards, we would leverage community organizations to solicit that feedback from the stakeholders with which they have connections. And to do that, we would need to create a contract with them. So we would have to put out a procurement for community-based organizations, knowledgeable about social studies topics, yada, yada, yada. I think it's a reasonable idea. I really do. I think I'm just curious as to like how we would frame the procurement request. So Alistair, to your point, I would love to find out if we think there's going to be funds left and figure out how we would word it. I will take that on. I will talk with Alex and with John Paul and find out, and I will follow up with the committee via email.
Amazing.
Again, in the spirit of, doing this before the break, I will plan to try to have these conversations prior to our working session so that I can raise anything up in the working session. Yeah, I'm with you too, Carlene. I don't know how we do that, but that's a question I have at the retreat this week. Like all those questions we answered about how we engage, like people are going to come if we can pay for childcare and food. Can we pay for childcare and food? So I think that's going to be a conversation on Friday, and hopefully will inform our request if we make one.
And that's so interesting, right? If we don't necessarily give the grants, sorry, I shouldn't call them grants, give the contracts out to community orgs, but rather hire somebody to take care of kids so that the parents can drop them off, know that they're taken care of, fed, we secure space, and just really make our outreach more accessible to families is another way. I don't know if that's an easier or a more difficult way.
Yeah, that I actually think, talking through this, that I think might be a really interesting thing to propose. Like, could we solicit via procurement a provider of childcare services to provide approximately X hours of childcare for state board events over the remaining course of the fiscal year? Like that would be really interesting to see. Could we do that with an expectation of like, how many events do we think might be adult focused but require childcare, and could we pilot that as a request? Because that's like a pretty clear procurement. Like that's what we need. We could scope in hours and solicit partners.
Yeah, I was typing in the chat. Even if I'm not sure how much funds that we will have, but even if we do need to possibly, because I know the timeline, I know they're both meaty topics, but even if we do need to do this one event and then we do social studies and star rating, and something else that the board might need community feedback on, and kind of do quick round robin sessions to get a bigger bang for our buck, could be another idea of something like a fall feedback session with the State Board of Education around our major initiatives.
I love that idea, actually.
Yes.
Charles Allen has done a couple of those in Ward 6 where he'll have it at the Watkins gym And then there are breakout sessions. We did that actually with the student advocate's office on a couple of different topics around returning citizens, around safe passage, around the new family shelter. So I think that's a really great idea. And for that, like securing funds for childcare for fall engagement sessions would be a really good. Y'all are so smart. This was fun. All right, it's 5:59. I'm gonna let everybody go. I will take up this conversation with Alex and John Paul and follow up over email before the working session. Thank you all for being excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you all. Bye.